Secrecy is the foundation of the world's oldest power. For decades, the monarchy guarded its silence until now. A black swan has arrived, a sealed genetic map that shatters history. This isn't a public announcement. It is the precise moment absolute certainty collapses. Princess Anne, the stoic temple guardian, finally cracked. Her rare tears weren't just emotion, they signaled a belief system colliding with an irreversible truth. Before we decode this historic shift, subscribe now. This wasn't a tabloid rumor. The leak bled from the very heart of the royal machine. A flawless system suddenly went dark. Calls were cut. Oak doors slammed. The air at Buckingham Palace wasn't filled with ceremony, but with the suffocating weight of a succession crisis. Everyone in that room knew the stakes. They weren't just facing a document, but the rewriting of history. Reputation can be salvaged, but when science questions the bloodline, there is no retreat. The moment the report touched Anne's hands, the order shattered. Witnesses called it a total collapse of discipline. Her trembling wasn't just nerves, it was the armor cracking. Why would a veteran of political storms unravel over a lab result? Because this wasn't just data, it was the key to a buried secret validating a dark warning whispered decades ago by Diana herself. Was this fate? Or the final move in a game we were never meant to understand? Diana's letters hid more than pain. They encoded an identity paradox, a flaw in the royal design itself. Anne once dismissed these warnings as paranoia. Now she realizes Diana wasn't venting, she was predicting the future. Whispers are easy to ignore. DNA is not. The physical evidence shattered Anne's composure. Normally, the system neutralizes threats before they surface, but this time the gears jammed. Total paralysis took over. They aren't staying silent out of caution. They are silent because the system has failed. When DNA rewrites history, the rule book burns. Inside the palace, the fear wasn't about managing the media, it was about the collapse of a centuries-old foundation. To understand this panic, we must uncover a secret 1990s pact. Diana the rebel and Anne the guardian, two opposites who should have clashed yet found a dangerous common ground in the shadows. It wasn't politics, it was shared survival. They both saw the hidden fractures in the crown. When the masks dropped, they faced the cold calculation of their reality together. In that silence, a warning was planted, one that became Anne's ghost. Diana wasn't just mourning a broken marriage. She was targeting the bloodline itself, exposing a flaw in a system the world thought was untouchable. That dormant warning has awoken as hard evidence. We are past the point of discovery. Now comes the fallout. If a genetic map can erase a legacy, which side do you choose, the cold facts or the ancient order type 2 for truth? Type 5 for stability. Don't just watch, decide. Like and subscribe now because the next mystery is even darker. Diana didn't name names. She left a system warning. This wasn't fear, it was a calculated failsafe. She rigged the timeline to ensure the truth would eventually surface. From that moment, her bond with Anne became a strategic pact. Through coded notes, they mapped out loops for the next generation's secrets, far too explosive for the monarchy to handle at the time. If the unexpected strikes, you must guard the final data. Diana's whisper wasn't a confession, it was a transfer of command. Anne accepted it as a dark theory only for history to turn it into a crushing, silent burden. Decades passed, but when the cold science of the genetic map surfaced, the truth hit Anne hard. Diana's warnings weren't riddles, they were precise predictions. The ghost has hardened into molecular proof, ready to dismantle the crown's foundation. Even Anne couldn't predict an external variable breaking the royal seal, An unnamed entity ensured this code escaped the dark archives. And the scariest part, this sample didn't come from a doctor's office. It wasn't routine. It was taken. Sources confirm this was Diana's self-preservation algorithm. In her final isolated years, she wasn't seeking medical answers, she was planting proof of identity. Now history collides with science. Marble walls can no longer block genetic truth. Is this a random glitch in the legacy, or is it the inevitable shock the system needs to finally evolve? If you held the key to topple the world's oldest power, what would you choose: eternal silence to keep the peace, or the dangerous road of truth, tell us truth or order? Diana knew she couldn't trust the system. She built a shadow network, a private circle of experts untouchable by the institution. Among them, one specialist crossed the professional line to become a silent witness to history. He saw past the pageantry. He knew the royal machine didn't just preserve history, it rewrote it to ensure survival. Under his watch, a silent biological protocol was executed. This wasn't rebellion, it was information insurance. The sample was vaulted off the grid far beyond the palace's reach, Diana's final defense against a system she could no longer trust. When Paris shattered, the world chaos took over. But Diana's insurance policy didn't trigger instantly, it went underground. The specialist tracked down Anne with a brutal message: the science contradicts the lie. Torn between her vow and the crown's survival, Anne made her choice. She didn't act, she buried it. Anne didn't destroy the data. She buried it. Encrypted in the deepest archive layers, it had no digital footprint, a ghost waiting for its cue. After 20 years of silence, the hidden variable woke up. A source from Diana's inner circle triggered the alarm. They didn't need to leak the full file. They just proved the weapon existed, the protocol, the specialist, and the signatures. That was enough. The hypothesis is dead. We are witnessing an irreversible chain reaction. The data exposes unexplainable anomalies in the very heart of the succession. These aren't random biological glitches. They are cracks in the bloodline. The immutable right to rule is finally being questioned. Science has breached the fortress of tradition, and the crisis is absolute. If a single genetic code can topple a kingdom, do we cleanse the system with truth or bury it to save the symbol? Secrets have moved from marble tombs to digital encryption. But when that code breaks, the choice is ours. In a transparent world, do we need necessary lies to protect history, or is truth the only legacy worth fighting for? Drop your analysis below, and follow us as we continue to decode the world's most complex systems. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The upper echelons of power didn't just shake, they cracked. Questions of legitimacy are no longer theories, they are weapons rewriting the equation of authority. Every sacred inheritance law is now on trial. The system scrambled to contain the damage and spin the story, but they failed. The leak unleashed a new, unstoppable, sovereign scientific truth. DNA speaks a language no diplomat can silence. The real shock wasn't the data, it was the breakdown. Princess Anne, the axis of discipline, finally shattered. Witnessing the monarchy's strongest pillar tremble behind closed doors proved one thing. This wasn't a political crisis. It was the death of a belief system. The truth didn't break on the news. It broke in the dim silence of her study. This was profoundly personal. Anne wasn't facing a scandal, she was staring at the historical paradox she had spent decades burying. Witnesses described total paralysis. She froze. She refused to speak to Charles or the heirs. That silence was the sound of the family structure snapping. She refused the summary. She demanded the raw evidence. But when her eyes hit the genetic code, the weight was unbearable even for her. Her tears weren't shock, they were recognition. Deep down, she had always felt the aftershock of Diana's warning. What the world called paranoia was now cold, hard science. The prophecy didn't just come true, it arrived with enough force to derail the entire monarchy. When she finally broke her silence to a single confidant, it wasn't just emotion, it was a confession of systemic failure. Her words cut deep. I swore I would protect her, and I failed. This isn't just grief, it's an admission that protocols and loyalty were powerless to save the truth. Anne didn't crack under media pressure. She cracked under the moral weight of realizing that her own silence was the wall blocking justice all along. The delay wasn't caution, it was a fatal error. By keeping the data locked, she let the machine crush the truth. Anne's tears aren't just grief, they represent the weight of her own inaction. But beneath the regret lies a terrifying realization. Her words, "The crown will never recover," aren't emotional hyperbole. They are a cold, hard diagnosis. When DNA disproves the bloodline, the throne loses its anchor. A lie this deep creates a permanent security flaw, one that can never be patched. For decades, the royal machine suppressed these shadows with ritual and protocol. But the genetic variable has ripped the veil away. We are done with whispers. This is the brutal collision of history and hard science. Genetic data does more than expose secrets. It reconstructs the truth. For the powerful, this isn't a media crisis. It is the demolition of the old order. The inquiry into loyalty and science ends here. Marble walls can no longer block the genetic code. A new chapter of history is being written right now in a language that is more objective and colder than ever before. Here is the final question. In a world where science strips secrets bare, can we handle a truth that shatters our reality? Or do we need myths to survive? If you held this report, would you choose disclosure to change the world or suppression to keep the peace? The data is now in the light. A seismic genetic misalignment has been found in the chain of succession. The map of power is about to be redrawn. When power is built on unbroken blood, a single deviation brings the whole structure down. If the genes don't match, the titles are void. This isn't just a legal issue, it is a crisis of institutional authenticity. Inheritance laws, royal decrees, and public trust are all suddenly suspect, and the deeper analysis reveals the terrifying truth. This was not a random accident. Diana didn't act on impulse, she acted on intelligence. Her security was compromised, her calls intercepted. To survive, she built a truth bunker outside the system, a final defense against a history she knew would be rewritten. But her trust had limits. Even Anne, the chosen guardian, was only given half the key. The name of the root variable remains in shadow. Only the warning of its destructive potential for the House of Windsor has endured through time. As these genetic fragments began to erupt into public discourse, this was no longer merely a media scandal. It was a direct assault on the structure of succession itself. Within the corridors of power, chaos spread as strategic advisors confronted a problem with no easy solution. If a single link in the direct line of succession is called into question regarding legitimacy, the entire legal framework that has governed the system thus far enters a state of temporary invalidation. This does not affect only the individuals directly involved. It raises a profound question about the future of the entire institution. Will the system choose purification to preserve the integrity of historical data, or will it attempt to shroud the issue beneath a new layer of diplomatic fog? As foundations once thought immovable begin to tremble under the pressure of empirical truth, the monarchy faces an existential crisis. This is not merely the story of an individual, it is the fracture of a belief system that has endured for centuries. If a single link in the chain of succession is proven to have a genetic misalignment, the entire legal structure and inheritance rules enter a state of invalidation. Silence from the firm is no longer a prudent strategy. It is becoming a catalyst for speculation about systematic deception. As parliamentary corridors begin to whisper about constitutional repercussions, public trust fractures between empathy and sharp scrutiny. While Anne sinks into a collapse of systemic certainty, another figure has emerged from the shadows with a radically different approach. Queen Camilla, in an emergency meeting behind closed doors, did not choose denial or grief. Instead, she displayed a state of strategic resistance. From her perspective, the genetic data was not a truth to be honored, but an information weapon sent from the past. Her remark about the recklessness of the deceased revealed an uncompromising confrontation between two modes of thought. On one side, Anne, with her anguish over an abandoned truth. On the other, Camilla, determined to protect the existing structure at any cost. The tension between the two most powerful figures within the palace erupted into a genuine battle of methodology. One side represented disillusionment and guilt, the other embodied a calculated damage control strategy. Camilla demanded a tight-lipped response, deploying legal instruments and media pressure to smother the leak. The marble walls now enclosed not only ritual, but a battlefield of legal threats and narrative manipulation. The system was attempting to heal itself by isolating the information pathogen, but can a genetic fracture truly be patched over with administrative paperwork? We have witnessed the moment when science, emotion, and power collide head-on. The final secret encoded in blood has not merely altered a lineage, it is raising a generational question about the very survival of institutions founded on heredity. Behind declarations about preserving stability, a strategy of system repositioning is being quietly deployed. The objective is not simply to contain a scandal, but to carry out a permanent data purification aimed at links deemed incompatible with the officially sanctioned bloodline. A leak from the highest advisory levels revealed a pragmatism bordering on cruelty. It is time to stop sustaining hypotheses that are not real. This was not merely a personal remark, it was a signal of an effort to rewrite royal history. According to internal analyses, the public relations apparatus received a top-secret directive: recast the genetic data as a product of imagination or part of recycled conspiracy narratives in order to preserve the coherence of the royal storyline. Yet this structure encountered an immovable force: the steadfast resolve of Princess Anne. In a moment described as the breaking point of internal diplomacy, she delivered a sharp declaration. This is not a narrative to be managed. This is the truth. Anne's departure from the meeting, punctuated by the slam of a closing door, marked the end of compromise protocols. For the guardian of tradition, the line between protecting the crown and betraying the truth had officially been crossed. At that moment, the system ceased to be a unified whole and fractured into factions with completely opposing value systems. As internal conflicts reached their peak, the palace's self-defense mechanism completely failed under external pressure. Whispers in the shadows rapidly transformed into blazing headlines across global media. This was the scenario. The firm feared most the truth was no longer within their control. As genetic maps were dissected by data analysts and the press alike, a wall of protection built over centuries collapsed in a matter of hours. Headlines about the Windsor bloodline and the DNA variable sent shockwaves across every digital platform. Now the story is no longer guided by royal statements, but by the relentless scrutiny of a global public. The question of bloodline legitimacy is no longer an internal matter. it has become an open investigation for all humanity. Every expert, every biographer, and every observer is constructing their own interpretation from the fragments of leaked data. The palace's silence is no longer a display of authority, it is a sign of paralysis in the face of an undeniable reality. We are witnessing a rare historical moment when genetic secrets become powerful enough to pierce the most fortified layers of a monarchy. This conflict is not merely between individuals, but between the value of truth and the duty to preserve the institution. Now we invite you to exercise your own analytical judgment. Can the crown survive in an era of absolute transparency, or are we witnessing the unraveling of a long-standing myth? Leave your perspective below, and don't forget to subscribe to follow the next developments in this explosive investigation. When the walls of silence were breached, the outside world applied immense pressure. Questions about the coherence of the succession system and bloodline variables were no longer confined to closed rooms. Media outlets began running algorithmic deep dives into the past, turning historical ghosts into direct weapons against present-day credibility. Amid this data storm, Princess Anne unexpectedly became the focal point of a generational debate. One side views her as a guardian of truth, while the other sees her as a link that allowed a system error to persist for far too long. In an era where subtlety has been replaced by the speed of dissemination, Anne has become the focal point of a structure in fracture. The true detonation of this chain of events originated from an unreleased root data source, a leaked portion of Diana's private diary. These were not merely pages of writing, they constituted a truth matrix recorded during her final months. References to a bloodline secret provided the public with the final pieces needed to complete the timeline and understand the motivations behind the unfolding events. When these data points were finally linked together, the palace's conventional diplomatic protocols became useless. Internal pressure reached an alarming level as figures within the system began to panic in search of an exit. Under advisors' pressure to issue an information patch, a denial statement, Anne made a shocking choice to end the cover-up. Her assertion, "There will be no more data distortion," transformed the monarchy's long-standing silence into a devastating blow to its very structure. At this point, the illusion of a fully unified system completely shattered. Constitutional experts were summoned daily to address variables threatening the survival of the crown. Inside, there was chaos born of contradictory decisions. Outside, an uncompromising demand for transparency. Anne stood at the eye of the storm where every pressure and every old promise collided at full force. Yet this was still not the end. In a move that overturned every rule of royal governance, Princess Anne took a step that no strategist had anticipated. She appeared before the cameras not as a symbol of power shielded by ritual, but as an individual confronting the truth. It was a shift from royal protocol to responsibility to truth, a final act of facing a reality that no marble wall could conceal any longer. The moment Anne stepped into view will be remembered as a fracture point in traditional history. There were no blaring trumpets, no ceremonial escort of courtiers, only a solitary figure fully shedding the mantle of the steadfast temple guardian. In her hands was not a censored administrative document, but a relic of truth, a crumpled letter from Diana, one that had haunted the system like a ghost for more than 2 decades. As the cameras captured the image, Anne began to speak. Her voice was not that of an institution, but of a human being tormented by prolonged silence. She did not begin with justification. She began by confronting the variables head-on. With a painful steadiness, Anne confirmed what the system had long sought to conceal. The genetic report was an objective reality. She admitted that fragments of truth had been entrusted to her by Diana in her final days, but that at the time she chose to prioritize structural stability over data transparency. Her confession carried the weight of a belated awakening. I mistakenly believed that burying a variable would protect the integrity of the entire architecture. But truth has no expiration date. It merely waits for the moment to reclaim its right to exist. In that instant, millions of watching hearts felt the shattering of a royal illusion, giving way to a stark, unadorned reality. The climax of Anne's address came when she broke every convention of lineage to reach the core of humanity itself. Looking straight into the camera, she delivered a direct message to the central figure of the storm, offering a new definition, one that drew a clear and deliberate line between a genetic map and an emotional legacy. She affirmed blood may define a line of succession, but empathy and love are what define a family. This act was not merely a gesture of consolation, it was a restructuring of values at the very heart of a system historically built solely on bloodline. Its impact was immediate, sending shockwaves across the globe, not through outrage, but through an unprecedented depth of empathy. That moment resonated far beyond the boundaries of an ordinary speech, becoming a seismic shift in how legacy itself was understood. For the first time in the modern era, the public was no longer observing a symbolic entity. They were confronting an act of existential authenticity. Anne chose to break through traditional barriers in favor of a universal truth. The wave of response was not merely support, but a redefinition of admiration itself. From the most exacting critics to the general public, all recognized this as the most powerful moment of humanization in the long history of monarchy. Anne had shifted the narrative, entirely transforming a data crisis, a DNA scandal, into a revolution of sincerity. Before leaving the podium, Anne left behind a principle that will be quoted for centuries to come, a manifesto on the balance between power and truth. Truth may generate tremors that shake the crown, but it is the very adhesive that strengthens the foundation of a nation. The silence that followed was not emptiness, but the sound of a system standing at a strategic breaking point, a state in which old rules no longer apply, and every path forward demands an unavoidable reckoning. A family was changed forever, not by external pressure, but by internal courage. Yet as Anne stepped down, a new chapter opened with the most critical variable of all, King Charles III. Facing an institution in flux and mounting questions about the coherence of the bloodline, the monarch now confronts a decision that will define his reign. Will he choose to continue the conservative protocols of the firm, or will he follow the path of transparency his sister has opened? This is not merely a personal choice. It is a question of whether a 1,000-year-old legacy can survive in the information age. The greatest question now no longer lies in genetic numbers, but in the response of the apex of power. Will the monarch choose to deny objective reality or accept the historical reckoning that Diana set in motion decades ago? Behind stone walls, the silence surrounding King Charles has become a terrifying pause. The cancellation of public engagements and the postponement of ceremonies are not merely personal retreats. They signal a paralysis of the entire representative machinery. Behind closed doors, a governance tragedy is unfolding. Charles is being torn between two opposing forces, the pragmatic faction led by Queen Camilla and a circle of seasoned advisors urging an immediate campaign of legal damage control to erect a barrier between the crown and the consequences of the DNA variable. And the legacy faction echoes from the past and the sincerity of Anne's confession, where the ghost of Diana is no longer merely a memory, but has become a shaping coefficient for the future of the reign. Charles is not merely confronting a personal crisis. He stands at the threshold of what can be called the entropy of the institution, a state in which old rules no longer possess the strength to hold a fracturing structure together. A shift in power has begun to surface through secret meetings with Prince William. Held late at night and entirely removed from advisory staff, these discussions carry the character of future reconstruction. According to system-level analyses, these are no longer ordinary father-son conversations. These were dramatic, contradictory, and at times explosive debates over how to maintain the crown when its very foundation has shifted. They are attempting to design a new protocol for an era in which truth can no longer be permanently sealed away. King Charles now stands before an entirely new map of reality. Every step he takes from here will determine whether the monarchy adapts in order to survive or collapses under the weight of secrets brought into the open. In your view, in the confrontation between institutional stability and the transparency of truth, which side will ultimately prevail? This content is purely for reference based on unverified hypotheses and public speculation. We approach it from an objective, analytical perspective. Join me in decoding this mysterious picture together. Press 1 if you want to continue digging into unexplored and undisclosed angles. Press 0 if you believe in the absolute self-protective mechanisms of the royal institution. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next shocking developments in the series Truth Behind the Veil. Thank you for accompanying us. See you at the next variable.